and welcome. I'm Ellie Richardson and you are watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Heavy attacks were reported in Tehran after Israel said it was hitting regime infrastructure in a new phase of the war it launched with the United States against Iran. President Donald Trump said it would be a waste of time currently to consider sending US ground troops into Iran, dismissing Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi's earlier remark that Iran was ready for US or Israeli ground invasion was a wasted comment. Lebanese militant group Hezbollah claimed responsibility for a wave of strikes targeting Israeli forces in retaliation for Israeli strikes on Lebanon the day before. The Iran-backed group said in 3 separate statements that its fighters had launched rockets and artillery shells at border positions. There were no reports of casualties. 3 Australian military personnel were on board an American submarine that sank an Iranian Navy ship off of Sri Lanka this week. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has said the personnel were on the submarine as part of a training arrangement under AUKUS, a multi-decade defence pact with Britain and the United States. The US House of Representatives on Thursday rejected an effort to curb Donald Trump's authority to wage war against Iran, as the president faces fierce criticism over launching the conflict without seeking approval from Congress. Lawmakers voted down a bipartisan resolution that would require Trump to obtain congressional authorization before continuing military operations against Iran. Hong Kong pro-democracy media mogul Jimmy Lai will not appeal his national security conviction that saw him sentenced to 20 years last month. His legal team said without providing a reason, the 78-year-old founder of the now defunct Apple Daily newspaper was found guilty in February of charges of foreign collusion. Venezuela and the United States are restoring diplomatic ties, the two countries have announced in a new sign of thawing relations after Washington ousted former President Nicolas Maduro. The announcement came as a U.S. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum wrapped up a 2-day trip to Venezuela, part of U.S. President Donald Trump's push for greater access to country's mineral wealth. And for your top stories this hour, amidst escalating tensions in the Strait of Hormuz and the ongoing conflict in West Asia, the United States has granted India a temporary waiver to continue purchasing Russian oil. This 30-day exception, announced by US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, is designed to stabilize global energy markets, particularly as oil supply routes through the Strait of Hormuz remain under threat. The move also comes as energy security remains a top concern for India, which relies heavily on oil imports passing through the strait. Indian officials have stated that the country's energy position remains stable, with almost 2 months' worth of stocks and diversified supply chains, but the government is closely monitoring the situation. As a precautionary measure, Australia and Canada have also stepped in, offering additional gas supplies to India amid the growing geopolitical uncertainty. Meanwhile, responding to US's waiver for India, Russia's envoy Kirill Dmitriev has said that this move highlights Russia's significant role in global energy markets. Dmitriev has also noted that despite political pressures, Russia remains committed to maintaining stable global oil supplies. We are now being joined by Dr. Ajay Dua, who's a former Secretary of Commerce and senior economist, joining us from New Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. What does the US's decision to grant India a temporary waiver to buy Russian oil reveal about pressures of the global energy markets during this conflict?
Thank you for having me in this discussion. I think the move by the United States administration yesterday to allow India to continue to buy, I shouldn't use the word continue because in between India had reduced its supplies, procurement of oil from Russia. But yesterday, India did buy a couple of tankers which were otherwise meant for going to the Far East, but since they were passing near the Indian coast, India did take the liberty of buying two such oil tankers. Thereafter, I believe the US move has come subsequent to India explaining it to the United States, the circumstances under which it bought these two oil tankers, the stuff under these tankers yesterday. The reason being very evident that for India, the Strait of Hormuz, which is currently technically open but otherwise not functional, it's a very important passage to India with as much as 40 to 50% of its needs passing through the Strait of Hormuz. This is as far as the crude is concerned, but also gas, CNG, as well as the LPG. They were coming from Qatar, and mainly from Qatar, but also from a couple of other sources in that region. Those have also been impacted. The prices in India have not yet gone up, but the government has already sounded out the signal for crude oil by saying our strategic reserves can cover about 2 months of requirement in India, but certain vendors, including a company called the Gujarat Gas, yesterday itself announced rationing. That means reduced allocations to its customers, particularly the industrial consumers of the gas. So yesterday's developments have been very good for India, that India was able to prevail upon and convince the United States that it's not sourcing new oil from Russia, but the oil which is already on the high seas and may be allowed to be used by India and the Indian customers, if the Russians are willing to sell it to it rather than the destinations of whether it's in the Far East or elsewhere. Similarly, the move yesterday by Australia as well as Canada that we can also help India with respect to gas, natural gas, or whether it's the CNG or it is the LPG, that needs to be, I think, watched, that they can bail out India during the current difficulty it's experiencing. And I think the good political relations which now we enjoy with Canada as well, with Prime Minister Carney's visit to India last week, I think the past has been buried, where there were certain suspicions about India's involvement in a particular incident in Canada. And with Australia, we've already signed, as you know, a low-hanging fruit terms of a trade deal, while we might be negotiating a larger deal. So Australia also has come up with made the announcement that it would like to help out India in its requirement, in its current situation. And for that, I think India is grateful to them.
Thank you, Dr. Ajay, but please don't go too far, as we'll be back with you very shortly. Japanese Foreign Minister Toshimi Motegi confirmed in Parliament on Friday that 2 Japanese nationals have been detained in Iran, but the government has verified their safety. Motegi strongly demanded their swift release. One of the detainees, Shinnosuke Kawashima, a Tehran borough chief for NHK, had been arrested by Iran and transferred to a Tehran prison. The Japanese government has been in contact with both individuals, working to secure their freedom. The government is coordinating with the relevant parties to ensure the safety of the Japanese nationals in Iran. Listen in.
イランのテヘランで、法事1名が、現地時間の1月の20日にですね、現地当局に拘束されたことを、確認をいたしております。また、現在イランにおいては、同法人を含めまして、2名が拘束をされております。これら、2名の法人とはですね、連絡が取れておりまして、現時点で安全であるということは確認をいたしております。
A US judge will meet behind closed doors on Friday to discuss the process for refunding up to $175 billion in illegally collected tariffs. Judge Richard Eaton of the US Court of International Trade will meet with government lawyers to work out a refund plan for over 300,000 importers after the tariffs were declared unconstitutional last month. The refund process is unprecedented and will require a manual review of tens of millions of tariff payments. The case, initiated by Atmos Filtration, is set to shape how refunds will be handled for thousands of other cases, potentially offering a quicker resolution for importers without requiring further litigation. We are now being rejoined again by Dr. Ajay Dua. Thank you for joining us back here for this. What is the significance of a judge calling for these tariff refunds tied to Trump's actions? And how might this signal the strength of the legal challenges that the US is undergoing? And how could this outcome of this settlement process affect US businesses and consumers who have been paying higher tariffs?
Thank you for calling me back into this on this discussion. I think it's very significant. If you would recall, when about 20 days ago, or 20 odd days ago, the US Supreme Court had ruled by a verdict, a 6-3 verdict, that President Trump's actions of levying tariff were not legal, or probably, I think they used the word unconstitutional. It had left open the question of what happens to the tariffs which have already been collected since President Trump's second term began, and the month of April, I think, he revised the tariffs, including when he brought up the Liberation Day tariffs. Before that, he had levied already flat 10% tariff on all the imports coming into the US, and from the Liberation Day onwards, he started off country by country revision upwards of the tariffs. The Supreme Court, however, had not taken a call on what happens to the tariffs, whether it's $160 billion or $175 billion. There are estimates that it could even be over $200 billion. The fact remains, whatever be the number, the fact remains that it is a huge sum the US government has able to collect. So, and it was probably rightly that the case was taken up immediately at the lower levels, lower than the Supreme Court, to decide whether I don't think the judge yesterday mentioned how. The question was the process. How do the people who have paid, the importers who have paid the duty, get it back? And he's now called both the sides. That means the US Treasury and the Commerce Ministries, probably Commerce departments of the US, as well as the importers who have paid the duty, to work it out. The US government has already made a statement before, it had made a statement before yesterday's decision of the court, that it's not returnable. So I think that was probably a starting point, and we shouldn't be surprised if President Trump says it's not, or his administration says that it's not returnable, because this money is coming very handy for the U.S. to ensure that the inflation in the country, as a result of the higher tariffs paid by the importers, does not cause too much of an inflation, and he's been able to use this money for other budgetary purposes, as well as giving relief to certain sectors and certain segments of the society. But the fact remains that if a thing is illegal, it has no legal basis, and that's what has been said, that unless President Trump seeks and obtains the U.S. Congress's approval, the whatever action is taken under the name of under IEEPA, the emergency powers which vest in the president in the case of a national emergency, that those are not valid. I would say that it's going to be it will be hotly contested. On one side, the importers demanding it, importers and the governments which have been impacted, consequently the foreign governments, they would be supporting, because they have to, more than a refund, they actually are seeking to make a point, and including India, saying that President Trump, you cannot levy arbitrarily, arrive at a figure and levy this, and without your being empowered, and with what kind of shackles the Congress imposes these or allows him to do it, is to be seen. So for future trade deals, for future actions by U.S. President, the decision of yesterday's decision of the judge is highly significant, and I do hope that he doesn't go into the constitutionality or the legality once again of a matter which has already been kind of ruled by the Supreme Court, that he would confine himself to the process and installments, etc., if the U.S. government seeks how these refunds could be effected, without at all questioning or making any observation whatsoever about the legality of the issue, since it stands settled.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ajay Dua, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Thank you. US Senator Mark Wayne Mullin of Oklahoma has been elected by US President Donald Trump as his nominee for the next Homeland Security Secretary. Responding to the nomination, Mullin has said that his top priority would be to focus on protecting the United States and securing its borders. Mullin has also commented on Kristi Noem, who was removed from her position by President Donald Trump. He has acknowledged her efforts in the role, saying that she had done her best under difficult circumstances. Let's now listen in to more of his statements.
Yes, I'm a Republican. Yes, I'm conservative. But Department of Homeland Security is to keep everybody, regardless if you support me, if you don't support me, regardless of what your thoughts are. I'm here to enforce the policies that Congress passed, and right now I'm part of it, but once I make that transition, my focus is to keep the homeland secure. That's going to be my focus, and we're super excited about this opportunity. I was excited. The president, first of all, the president, I have a really good relationship. We talk all the time anyways. I've got to be honest with you, I wasn't expecting the call today, but super excited. And I'm more excited about just ready to get started. There's a lot of work we can do to get Department of Homeland Security working, working for the American people. You know, the Department of Homeland Security has a very broad jurisdiction. And I think there's a lot of work that we need to do, and I'm excited.
Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto has reassured local Islamic groups that he will withdraw from US President Donald Trump's Board of Peace if it does not benefit Palestinian interests. The decision to join the board and contribute troops for a Gaza stabilization force has faced criticism at home, particularly from Muslim groups. President Prabowo met with leaders of Islamic groups on Thursday, stating he would withdraw if the platform no longer serves Palestine or Indonesia's national interests. The Indonesian Ulama Council had already called for exiting the board due to the US role in the Iran conflict. We're now being joined by Professor Rohan Gunatna, who's an international affairs expert. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. So obviously, we've heard a lot about the Board of Peace, and now Indonesia is saying it may withdraw from the US, from the US-led Board of Peace, if it doesn't benefit Palestinians. Does this signal growing skepticism among global South countries, especially about these peace initiatives led by Donald Trump?
Ellie, as you said, the US-Israel war against Iran has created some unhappiness among the Muslim groups in Indonesia. And that is why President Prabowo Subianto met with the Indonesian Islamic groups and gave them an assurance that unless it is in the interest of Indonesia or the Palestinians, that he will withdraw. But I want to share with you that it is unlikely that he will withdraw, because one is that President Prabowo is very keen for Indonesia to play a bigger role, not only in the ASEAN countries, but also globally, as Indonesia is the largest Muslim country. Second is this agitation and unhappiness is largely because of the war. And I believe that in the coming weeks, that the conditions will once again emerge for the Gaza peace plan to be revisited, because at this point there is no progress in the Gaza peace process because of the war with Iran. And during that time, President Prabowo will most likely come back and explain to the Islamic groups that it is in the interest of Indonesia and also the Palestinians that Indonesia play a very important role in the international stabilization force.
And with discussions on the peace initiative reportedly paused due to what's going on in the Middle East with US, Israel and Iran, does this highlight how the broader Middle East conflicts is undermining international peace frameworks?
Very much. As you mentioned, the conflict in the Middle East has had an impact on the peace process. So with regard to Gaza, phase 1 is release of all hostages that Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the other terrorist groups have done. Now phase 2 is the disarmament phase. This is the most difficult phase. So I believe that this particular topic of disarmament will be revisited in the coming weeks. And at that point, there will be greater commitment on the part of a number of countries that have committed troops to form the contingent in Gaza that will maintain peace, and that will also ensure the disarmament of the terrorist groups in Gaza, because without disarmament, there will be no peace process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. It's a pleasure speaking with you as always. The European Union Foreign Policy Chief, KJ Kallas, and her Swiss counterparts Ignacio Cassis have signed a joint declaration that sees the EU and Switzerland have agreed to strengthen their cooperation on foreign policy, security and defence. Switzerland's Foreign Minister Ignacio Casas has said that with the conflict in the Middle East, stable relations with EU-Switzerland are the closest partner, and European Union are strategically important for Switzerland. Let's listen in to what they had to say.
The recent military escalation between the United States, Israel and Iran shows one thing very clearly. Today, no regional conflict stays regional. Tensions in the Middle East affect Europe directly, our security, our energy supply, our trade routes, and our economic stability. In this context, stable relations with our closest partner, the European Union, are strategically important for Switzerland. We also signed a framework participation agreement that will make it easier for Switzerland to take part in EU civilian and military peace missions.
Fair to say that in 1 week we delivered more progress in our partnership that we have seen over many years. EU and Switzerland are long-standing partners. Your contributions to EU operations in the Western Balkans and Africa are immensely important. And those who want to harm our democracies are not standing still. Neutrality is no obstacle to closer cooperation. That is also why the Swiss Parliament decision to ease arms export rules is a step in the right direction. This will support both Swiss industry and European security, and for EU it is important that Swiss exports can also reach all member states.
Clashes across Sudan's southern Kordofan region killed at least 51 people as the army has said that it has recaptured the city of Bara on the road to Khartoum. Kordofan is currently the fiercest battlefield in the war raging between army and the Parliamentary Rapid Support Forces since April 2023. According to reports, the South Kordofan city of Dilling was rocked throughout the day on Thursday by artillery fire and drone strikes. The Sudanese authorities have reported that 28 people killed and 60 injured, including children and women. Vietnam's police-owned telecom operator Mobifone is in talks with the Chinese tech firms over new contracts to build parts of its 5G network, despite US warning of security risks following earlier deals. According to reports, the talks precede a planned visit to China by Vietnam's top leader to Lam in coming weeks. Any deal by Mobifone would follow market leaders Vitel and VMPT, which signed 5G supply contracts last year with ZTE and Huawei, in a notable shift from years of caution towards Chinese 5G technology amid warning bilateral ties. That's all we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.